Good day, fellow adventurers. Welcome to Dresden's Tale, episode 62. This is season 3, volume 3, chapter 58 in our glory-bound tale. This is high military fantasy, the kind that needs heroes. Ours is Dresden Fane. He's a studious fellow, a master of bad moods, and sometimes he's pretty good in a fight. He's a warrior of the Stone Clan, boldly striding across a landscape ravaged by war. I'm Lewis Nichols, your procrastinating host, master of digital effects, coordinator of on-set photography, etc., etc., and so forth. I'm the guy who wrote this thing, a crazy project spanning 2 decades and a whole cartload of Word documents. Thanks to YouTube, I now have a reasonable way to pass it on to you. I once said I would sometimes tell the story rather than just read it. It's a weird distinction that never really came up until now. This is a rare point in the story, especially in the early tale, that is deserving of nothing less than big screen cinematics. Why? One can describe the majesty of a dragon. The hard scale shell, highlighted in crimson at the joints, smoke rising from the nostrils of his crocodilian head, the terror of glistening steel claws and ancient wisdom of the burning eyes. I could go on for pages before matching one great shot of the roaring, battle-raged beast on screen. Disney, I'm here. What's your offer? Now, Dresden thought the ass end of that big dragon was about the best thing he'd ever seen. Well, not in a dirty way. That's just gross. And probably dangerous. Nope, to him, the beauty of it was they were facing the same way, standing together against a common enemy. You'd think having that damn dragon on your side would fill the guy with confidence, but even Dresden could clearly see the air dragon some 200 yards away, surrounded by his own horde of Itarian warriors. Ah! How are we supposed to live through this? Dresden barely heard Ralph. Both lines of warriors chanted, beat drums, and exposed their private parts to the opposing line. Follow the doctrine, or just decide you've already died. The next thing you'll see is the new life you're being born into. Another chance to honor the gods. The pterodon squawked. I don't like either of those. Dresden felt Kira's hand on his shoulder. He was just as terrified as the rest of them, of course, but the touch made him feel a little better about it. Just stick with me, he told her. She smiled and nodded. You know I will. Meanwhile, Liz ignored them all, banging her fists against her chest and screaming threats that all revolved around eviscerations and sexual assault. Maybe we won't fight. Rot! It's too even, Ralph said. Donald had to wait for the dragon Rogandra to finish his particularly loud roar. That's exactly why we'll fight. It comes down to leadership, and nobody's going to admit they're not the best leader. Dresden didn't remember the name of the Itarian general who opposed them. It had been mentioned in one of the briefings, along with another 1,000 little pieces of information. It should have mattered, but not to the dwarf. The champion Maxine was their leader, and that wasn't particularly relevant either. There was only the doctrine. Terrain would play no part in the battle. The Carsi Trajan was a flat and windy lowland plain, gradeless, useless soil stretching for miles. For 1,000 acres, the highest point was no more than an inch above the lowest. The ground was chalky, crunching underfoot, barren, lifeless, waterless. It might have been the absolute worst place to be in all the plains. The heroes didn't stop at Maxine and Rogandra. Thuspathox, the elemental lord, was present, a friend to Bandai Stonehands, who was also present. He was the high priest of Omedan in Moldav South. Zephin was there, and Iquirda that I haven't told you much about before. He was one of the original questers, capable of miraculous speed, granted by blessings from Dagonis and Sorphus. Of the 1,600 warriors in the force, 100 were Eliki, and 100 more were other beasts, from ogres to a pair of bridge trolls. A horn sounded. Action was imminent. Cormac was back with them, at least for this fight, put in charge by Dresden's decree. The decree that most of the others just laughed off. Now he stood tall, sweating in heavy scale, an oversized footman's mace in his hand. He was calling himself an acolyte of Og's now. He was antsy to get on with it. They all were. 2/3 of their force are warriors just like us. Stick to the doctrine, and you'll do well. Dresden also gave instructions. Ralph, you're our eyes. Keep us on Lenny's left flank. Sure. It was nice knowing you. Finally they charged. It was as if both sides launched themselves at some prearranged signal. The dragons were on each other before Dresden's troop was halfway there. Rogandra's fiery breath went wide, boiling a squad of Iterian cavalry to ash. Follow the doctrine, and don't have any bad luck, Dresden thought. Rock, drifting left! Dresden saw Thuspathox changing course, taking a bearing on what he could only call a hydra. The vaguely turtle-like body sprouted 5 long necks, tipped by heads akin to those of weasels. Meanwhile, the earth elemental formed itself into a rolling ball of sand and stone, careening towards the beast. They couldn't keep up, but they weren't far behind Lenny's corps. By the time they came into contact, Thuspathox had transformed himself into something like a worm, as big as the Hydra, his body upright, with 4 muscular arms trying to control the many heads of its opponent. Iterian ogres moved to encircle the elemental, but Lenny crashed into their lines, disrupting their strategy. There, Cormac yelled. He was already moving towards one of Lenny's warriors, half caught up in goblin nets. Dresden stopped staring at the behemoths in battle and snapped into action. That was the doctrine. The priest of Agamar said it started at the top, with the whole line of battle arrayed to support the strongest warriors on the field. Biona's church said it was the other way around, with the horde of lesser warriors being the ones to hold the ground. Hence, the warriors were really there in support of them. Either way, if the goblins were left to start overwhelming Lenny's companions, their whole half of the field would start to fall apart. Dresden let Cormac and Donald harass the mongrels. He took Liz and Kira against their commanders, 2 bare-faced Iterians just as eager to brawl as Dresden was. Our hero took a heavy blow to the chest. He thought his heart stopped for a second. Losing balance, he stumbled back. It took a few steps, but Dresden got his feet back under him. He found he wasn't as hurt as he first thought. It was just a stunning blow. Roaring back in anger, Dresden struck the Iterian in the shin. He shifted, trying to use his head to fight smart. As best he could, he maneuvered to allow space for his friends. It was hard to keep track of everything, even this little realm of the battlefield. Ralph got a hold of the goblin's net and went full grapple against one of the Iterians, while Liz caught their opponent across the temple with her right cross, her keratin-armored hands knocking him back. The scene was chaotic, 100 individual fights all woven together like a quilt of madness. Ogres peeled away from Lenny, coming into Dresden's zone. Farther to the left, an unofficial militia from Sormiel clashed with blocks of heretic spearmen protecting bowmen. Arrows whizzed through both formations. Dresden cracked a wounded ogre, only to give ground when it took offense at his aggression. In retreat, he nearly tripped over Ralph and his netted opponent, while someone he didn't recognize hacked at the prone Iterian with the edge of her shield. "In the face! Rah! In the face!" Ralph yelled, the Tagara doing her best to comply. "Hold him still!" she demanded. When the ogre tried to get over the pile, Dresden moved back in. He took another painful strike, but connected twice against the lower torso of the mongoloid. The beast went to a knee, landing partially on top of Ralph and knocking back the Tagara at the same time. Dresden tossed down his shield, thinking only of the netted man's vulnerability. He came overhead with a wild 2-handed swing of his hammer. It struck so hard, the Iterian's eyes went wide, nearly popping out of their sockets. Puke and bile shot into the air as his guts exploded out of every orifice, blasting the ogre as it got back to its feet. A man-sized weasel's head crashed next to them. The impact sent shards of hard soil flying. Dark stone shot in every direction. No one said a word at the interruption. They all just stared at the weasel's jaws, clenching, its eyes fluttering, blood and bile pulsing out the neck. The ogre, goblins, Dresden, none of them moved. For a moment, they only watched the spectacle. Liz was the first to recover, pushing the puke-drenched ogre back into the mess of netting, still tangled with the vomit-covered Itarian. Ralph punched the beast's knee, himself still prone. The attacks were ineffective, at least partially because Dresden was now trying to drag him clear by pulling at the web of rope. The tug of the net, transited through Ralph, brought the ogre down. Liz kicked him in the rib. Unhappy with the results, she leapt into the air and came down with an elbow in his groin. The beast grabbed her, but Dresden yanked at Ralph again, keeping the beast man off balance. Finally, the Tagara ended the microcosm of violence by driving her spear through the ogre's skull. With the big beast down, they all came back around to drive the goblins back. "Orders?" Liz cried over the sound of the surrounding battle. The elemental and the Hydra still clashed, just 100 feet away. It was like fighting next to a tornado. Dresden saw Cormac and most of his friends fighting a mix of goblins and what he assumed were Itarian militia. Seemingly, their band had things well under control. The sight of Kira ramming a blade through someone's ribs brought a smile. It was a heartwarming moment, knowing they shared the same inferno of emotions brought on by conflict. Liz got tired of waiting for an answer and rushed the wounded Hydra. Dresden shrugged and followed. It wasn't the smartest thing to do. It probably conflicted with the doctrine, but he couldn't let her go alone. The folly didn't last long. She tried to punch the great beast in the leg, then picked up a fallen broadsword and hacked at it. Somewhere nearby, the dragons roared, but Dresden couldn't see a thing through the blinding dust stirred up by the clash. Itarian fighters came into the fray. Dresden engaged the first, but a second died by Lenny's blade. The man had just appeared out of the cyclone and cleaved death. Before disappearing again, he gave Dresden a look that could have been criticism or approval. He wasn't sure, but then again, he couldn't leave Liz. Instead, he engaged spearmen trying to harass his commander's flank. Whether he was really in the right position or not, he felt like he was doing some good, as Lenny was free to drive his sword between scales and elicit a scream from the Hydra. Dresden took down a spearman and fought 3 more as Donald and the others came up to help. As the last one fell, he could finally see a bit better as the Hydra fight had moved away. "Sorry, I had to," Liz told him, shaking her injured hand. "Not the doctrine," Ralph squawked. The last of the goblins had fallen, and a moment of peace came to their patch of dirt. "We'll hold here," Cormac said. "That thing won't last against Lenny and Thus. We just have to keep them covered." "Against what? There's nothing here." "So what? We can't hurt it." We can help Sormeal." Dresden stood. He thought he should have been winded after the fighting, but he felt ready to go. A light heel from Donald had him eager. Cormac insisted. "You didn't want to be in command. It's not the right thing to do. Why are you guys listening to him?" The rest of the warriors were preparing for new action. "It sounds smart," Kira told him. Donald snorted. "I don't know, but standing and watching on a field led by a champion of Agamar and the clan seems dumb." Back in the fight, Liz wielded a long hammer, twice as long as Dresden was tall, 10 times heavier. She laughed at her friend. "You just can't keep your mouth shut. You could just be a warrior, but no, you can't stand not giving orders." Dresden felt emboldened when the Tagara in front of him gave up a step. He lunged forward and struck the Itarian in the jaw with his pug. "I just said what I thought we should do. It was your idea." "Oh, no, not me. I followed you. You engaged the Hydra." She laughed, finishing out a strong overhand blow against a human. He managed to take most of the attack on his shield, but Dresden crushed his groin with a thrust of his own. "Seemed like a good idea. Do you think anybody was watching?" "I did. It was pretty brave." A deafening roar swept across the open plain. Rogandra let the world know his cowardly opponent had chose to flee. The Itarian near Dresden shied away, not quite ready to break, but shaken. Dresden howled and led a renewed assault. Full of confidence, he waded into the enemy, daring them to put up a fight. Killing a man with a bash to the torso, he felt somebody grab him by the collar and yank him back. An instant later, a 20-foot length of smoldering dragon's tail came down in front of him, clearing 10 feet of the battlefield. The Battle of LXII was over. Dragons and hydras and elemental lords. Oh my, what a battle! If you're wondering, the Hydra didn't make it. His death, while Dresden's squad went to fight with the warriors of Sormiel, was a decisive twist. Thus cleared up a patch of trouble where the High Priest Stonehands was fighting. That freed Stonehands up for some holy hocus-pocus shenanigans, and well, dragons don't get old by making noble last stands. Without meaningful opposition, Rogandra blasted the Iterian command group and started going ham on the rank and file, like Godzilla busting up some power lines or smacking on an elevated train. Obviously, a lot of Iterians got away. Even decisive battles often end with both sides taking less than 10% casualties. There were key losses, but for now, Dresden's tale is about the little guys, the micro, not the macro. While we're talking about the macro, what about the doctrine? One of the many conflicting pressures on Dresden's tale is the youth of the Empire versus divine knowledge. On the one hand, it was only a couple generations ago that the hapless population of Patronsburg nearly lost the basic knowledge of metallurgy. 10 years ago, there was one paper mill in the whole of Moldav, and that was freshly built near Parnasilia. Yet there are secrets far beyond the working of iron in the holy books of the Keld religion. Concepts of math, physics, alchemy, and many other fields lie in their pages. This has not only accelerated weapons from bronze axes to diamond steel broadswords in less than a dozen years, it's also given insights to the strategies of war, both tactical and strategic. There have been few battles the likes of Carsi-Trajan, but the well-read generals of the clans have an advantage. It's not cheating exactly. If we were telling the tale of the Iterians, we'd know about their secret advantages too. As it is, they are a mystery. It's enough to delve deep into the fantasy foundations of Dresden's world. Unfortunately, that's all the delving for now. We're going to leave our gang of warriors alone. We'll let them decompress and brag about the glory of battle. They'll remember the fallen of this battle and others, while looking forward to the next. It's a warrior's world, full of fear, uncertainty, bravado, and bloodlust. Leave a like, it helps. If you haven't subscribed already, I hope I've earned that honor today. As usual, I'd love to talk about the episode or related topics in the comments. Most of all, I hope you all have a spectacular day. Thanks for stopping by. Cheers.